everybody. My name is Moss. Welcome or welcome back to my YouTube channel. Okay, today I have got to talk about my favorite era of history. Okay, this is my Roman Empire. This is everything I love. This is Mesopotamia, okay? The land between the two rivers. Now, this is a bad map, and we'll show close-ups of the map. This is a bad map. I did it myself. I'll show you a good map. This is a good map of Mesopotamia. This is a bad map of Mesopotamia, but it gets the job done. So these are the two important rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. We are going to be talking about Assyria, okay? And Assyria, and I'm going to try and detail the reigns of 4 kings: Tiglath-Pileser III, Shalmaneser V, Sargon II, and Sennacherib I. Okay. This is my favorite. This is really exciting. This is the world, okay? Not all of it, as a lot more has been discovered at this point. Around this time, elsewhere in the world, the Greeks were doing the Olympics, were starting the Olympics. Rome was being founded. A lot of stuff was happening in China and India that I just cannot get into, because today we're talking about Assyria, Babylon, and all the drama that ensues. Okay, when our story starts, Assyria has been having an off few centuries. And when you say an empire is having an off few centuries, that just means they're not expanding right now. The things haven't been going great. The edges of the empire have been crumbling. So much so that the walls of Ashur, their main city, Ashur, which Assyria is named after, the walls were crumbling, and no order was ever sent to repair it from any official or king. People would take the stones for their own building projects, and ancient cities need walls. It's very, very important. So it just shows how in decline the empire was at this time. So, in the city of Kale, the capital of Assyria, we meet a man named Pul, P-U-L. Now, Pul, he's the governor of Kale, and he's probably a royal cousin of the king. Pul leads an insurrection, and he kills the sitting king and his entire family and becomes king himself. And he renamed himself, just like the Pope does, he renamed himself Tiglath-Pileser III, okay? Tiglath-Pileser III, very cool. I shortened that down to Tig-P3, and I think Tig-P3 sounds like a Star Wars droid, so I made this incredible piece of art. And I think it's very funny. It is very funny to me. Tig-P3 is now king of Assyria. Now, down in Babylon. Now, Babylon is one of our main players. Babylon is the cultural center of this world, okay? Babylon is incredible. Babylon, and another thing about Babylon, it's spelled Babylon, which I think is really funny. Babylon. Babylon was the cultural center of this world. Babylon the Great, okay? And now, Babylon is not strong militarily, but they are, like, very rich and have a strong cultural output. So even though there is, like, no Babylonian army, they hire armies from the south very frequently, okay? Now, at this time of Pul in Kale, another man comes to the throne of Babylon, another powerful man. His name was Nabonassar, okay? Nabonassar was a Chaldean. Chaldeans are from the south, down here in Elam, okay? Chaldeans have been in charge of Babylon for a while now. They've been the ruling class. So Babylon has not been ruled by actual Babylonians in a long time. So, under Nabonassar's reign, things seem to have been really good for Babylon. They got really they were at peace. They were flourishing, and because of that, they had enough free time to get into, like, things like astronomy / astrology, and they got so into it that for many people, the word Chaldean and the word astronomer were interchangeable. That's why the Greeks, it was interchangeable to them. That's why in the Bible, when Nebuchadnezzar called for his wise men and his Chaldeans, he was calling for his astrologers, his astronomers, because an astronomer and an astrologer was the same thing back then. Nabonassar is king of Babylon. Things are great. Tiglath-Pileser III is king of Syria, and he goes down to Babylon and offers friendship to Nabonassar, because friendship and allyship. Because right now the empire is crumbling, and he doesn't need an enemy in the south. So Nabonassar graciously accepts his friendship, and everything's chummy and wonderful and happy. Um, Tiglath-Pileser sends armies down to help Nabonassar shore up his reign. And interestingly, the peoples he conquered, quote, one,
The cities of Babylonia by the shore of the Lower Sea I annexed. I annexed them to Assyria. I placed my eunuch over them as governor.
paid tribute. They paid tribute not to Nabonassar, but to Tiglath-Pileser, even though they were fighting on Nabonassar's behalf. So, at this time, Tig P3, he built a city just north of Nineveh, an Assyrian city just north of Nineveh, called Kar Ashur, which means the wall of Ashur. And it was supposedly to help protect Babylon, but in reality it was like a spy outpost. It was filled with Assyrian officials, Assyrian people, and they were there pretty much to spy on Babylon. Okay, so he returns. So Tiglath-Pileser, after doing all that, he returns to Kale and proclaims himself.
King of Sumer and Akkad.
Now, Sumer and Akkad didn't exist anymore. It's kind of like if the King of England called himself the King of the Iceni, which was like a British tribe forever ago. Like, technically, maybe, but probably not, you know? Nabonassar seems not to have cared what titles Tigp3 gave himself, because peace at this time was more profitable than war, okay? So, Tiglath-Pileser III, he replaces the rebellious governors with people that are loyal to him. And, and he sets up an ancient Mesopotamian pony express to get word from the different cities to the capital in a reasonable amount of time, so that he had better control over the empire. Okay, so with the Assyrian interior exercised, he turns north. Now, we've gotten to the cool part. Urartu. They're the cool ones in this story. They're my favorite, okay? Besides Assyria, they're my favorite. The Urartu are awesome. They're mountain people. They live up there. In these last few centuries, they have been expanding south. Now, the Urartu, the people there, are ancient enemies of Assyria. Assyria tends to go to war with Urartu when they're at peace everywhere else, just because they got to do war. They're that kind of people. They've got to do war. And Urartu, because of this frequent invasion from the south, have gotten really freaking strong. Okay, they've got impenetrable fortresses, and they're in the mountains. And these people are from the plains. Mountains freak them out. I'll talk more about the Urartu in a minute, but they have moved south into northern Assyrian territory. They've spread as far as Carchemish, and the city of Arvad is loyal to them. And the Carchemish, even though they're allies with Assyria, they've become allies with Urartu now, which is like a betrayal of allyship because they're enemies and whatever. Anyway, so Tiglath-Pileser III besieges Arvad, and the siege lasts 2 years. It's bloody on both sides. It's wild. By 740 BC, Tiglath-Pileser conquered Arvad and made it his new base, from which he conquered the rest of northern Assyria over the next 5 years.
The gorges and precipices of the mountains I filled with their bodies.
By 735 BCE, BC, he'd retaken northern Assyria. He chased Sarduri I and stopped at the Euphrates. However, Urartu, even though it's smaller, remains independent. Yay! Independent Urartu. Yay. Now, something cool. Because of all this fighting right here, up in this direction, the maps, the political maps got rearranged. So up in this direction, a new kingdom formed, and its first king lives in legend even to this day, King Midas. King Midas. I know about him because of Percy Jackson. Midas, like, he went to the Oracle of Delphi and everything. So that's this era. And I think that's really freaking cool. Okay, so Tiglath-Pileser. He then, now that North is conquered, he goes east and fights Parsua and Mada. Now, Parsua and Mada, I gotta tell you just real quick, they're tribes on the other side of the Zagros Mountains. And Parsua and Mada will one day be known as the Medes and the Persians. Yes! Okay, so he goes and fights them and wins. Then he goes west, Samaria and Israel. Now, Israel was ruled by a guy named Menahem. And Menahem, when he saw the Assyrian army coming over the hills, he sent 40 tons of silver to try and buy the Assyrians off. The king of Judah was even more of a desperate kiss-ass. Its king Ahaz stripped the temple of Solomon, the Solomon's temple, of all of its treasures, sent them to Tiglath-Pileser, and offered to become their ally in a war against Israel. Nice backstab to your brother kingdom, Ahaz. So, Assyria with Judah fight Israel, and Israel loses most of its northern territory to Assyria. Assyria invades Hama, and Hama loses. Then Tiglath III goes to war with King Wasurama of Tabal because he was, quote, 3, acted as if he were an equal of Assyria. Tiglath-Pileser has been conquering all over the map. But at this time, down in Babylon, Nabonassar has died. Okay? He's died. And Babylon has fallen into civil war. Oh my God, what's going to happen? Tiglath-Pileser, he sees an opportunity, and so he starts marching down to Babylon. The Babylonian people split in two. Half of them want to surrender outright. Some of them are pro-Assyrian, especially the northern Babylonians, but others want to put up a probably pointless fight. I mean, you've seen Assyria, they're winning everywhere. You don't fight an Assyrian. That I hope, if you take one lesson from this video, it's that you shouldn't fight an Assyrian will win. The king of Babylon, he flees the city down to a city called Sapia. Now, Sapia has 3 walls, the shortest of which was 15 feet high, and they got taller after that. Sapia was a fortress, and Sapia fell. Sapia fell to Tiglath-Pileser III. And after defeating Sapia, he turns back around and goes back up to Babylon. And Babylon prudently opens its gates, okay? Now, Tiglath-Pileser III enters the city in glory, okay? He takes the hand of Marduk at the New Year's festival of 728 BC. Now, I've got to talk about taking the hand of Marduk real quick. It's a big freaking deal. Taking the hand of Marduk is a ceremony in which the king, during the New Year's festival, shakes the hand of the god Marduk. And you can't become king of Babylon if you don't do that. It's very important, and it's formal submission to the god. Elam and the rest of the south down here just saw the fall of Sapia, okay? And they're like, oh my freaking god, we're gonna surrender. So all the warlords go up to Babylon and bend the freaking knee, okay? Including a man by the name of Merodach Baladan. Okay.
Merodach Baladan, a king of the sea land who had not submitted to any of the kings, my fathers, and had not kissed their feet.
Now, Merodach Baladan was the chief of Bit Yakin down here on the Persian Gulf, okay? And I have a scene, a little skit to showing the meeting between Merodach Baladan and Tiglath-Pileser III. Okay, introducing Chief of Bit Yakin, Introducing Merodach Baladan, Chief of Bit Yakin, and Chaldean Warlord, into the court of His Royal Highness Tiglath-Pileser III. O great king, O great king, it is an honor, nay, a privilege, to kneel at your feet. I bring gifts. I bring many gifts. I bring gifts of gold and silver. Here is some silver for demonstration. And I bring livestock and logs of valuable wood. I know your trees don't grow much where you're from. And here I am to kneel at your feet and swear fealty.
Kiss my foot. Dismissed.
Of course, of course. Nailed it. Now turn back.
Glory! Exaltation! I, and I alone, am the king of Assyria and Babylon! Glory to me!
Something cool is that Tiglath-Pileser III made it onto the Babylonians' own king list. He was the first one to be accepted by the people, the first Assyrian conqueror to be accepted by the people as their king. He did like so much. He rebuilt the empire, and he was king of Babylon and Assyria. And he all this papered very nicely and neatly over the fact that he had no right to either throne. In 726 BC, 2 years after taking the hand of Marduk, Tiglath-Pileser III dies. And his son, probably son, Shalmaneser V, reigns supreme. Shalmaneser V, I'm going to shorten that down to Shelley V. Shelley wasn't popular. We don't know a ton about Shelley. Okay, Shelley had a short reign, and so these cities in the west, like Tyre, Sidon, Samaria, and Jerusalem, they paid tribute to Assyria, but they weren't like part of the empire. They were still their own countries. Shelley V fought to wipe them out completely. Shalmaneser V started 2 sieges at the same time, at Tyre and Samaria. These sieges dragged out. They weren't very successful, and he was very unpopular. Another thing Shelley did was tried to implement a forced labor program in the city of Assur. So people really didn't like him. So our window, our record of events, our window into the past blinks. And when our eyes open again, Shelley V is dead, and a new king has claimed the throne. Sargon II, okay? Sargon II, okay. Now, history is really hushy about Shalmaneser V's death. If he had died in battle, we'd probably know. We don't know how he died, but probably Sargon II did something horrible to his probable brother. They were probably both sons of Tiglath-Pileser III, apologies. At this time, though, when they were doing the sieges, Israel, Samaria's neighbor, wait. Israel, not Judah. Israel wrote to Egypt asking for aid against Assyria. Now, Egypt at this time is really going through a lot. Egypt's down that way. They're going through a lot, specifically the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th dynasties simultaneously. It's a mess down there. They're really busy with their own thing. They can't help, and they don't respond to Israel. It's a bad idea to ask, though, because Assyria's spies were all over that. Sargon II is now king. Quote 5.
Whereupon the Lord of the gods, in the anger of his heart, overthrew his rule, Shalmaneser's rule. Me, Sargon, my head he raised on high. Assure's freedom from dues I restored, from the call to arms of the land, the summons of the taskmaster, from tax, toll, and dues to all the temples of Assyria, I freed them.
Sargon II was rather ruthless, it seems, because what he did was he broke the sieges. He retracted the forced labor program in Ashur and broke the sieges in Tyre and Samaria. And what he did to Samaria was something that Assyrians would do to conquered people who clung too tightly to independence, which was mass deportation. He took the people and broke their connection to the land, broke their connection to their ancestors, and scattered them all across Asia Minor. It's a form of genocide. It isn't mass murder, but it is the destruction of a mass identity. You may have heard some conspiracy that these 10 lost tribes moved to Europe or Africa or the Americas or Antarctica or Mars. This is not true, okay? Sargon II never would have allowed a conquered people to go wandering the earth as they pleased. I'd like to read a quote from Susan Weisbauer's History of the Ancient World. Given that Sargon II would never have allowed any sort of mass exodus of the Israelites, his whole goal was to destroy their identity as a nation. The 10 tribes of Israel were not lost as though they had been misplaced in toto and could be rediscovered. They were very efficiently destroyed. Heavy stuff, heavy stuff. But we're moving on to quote 6, Syria and Hamath versus Kakar. So Kakar and Hamath up here, and Syria up here, just saw what happened to Israel, and they decide now would be a good time for a revolution. So they try and put up a fight against Assyria. Assyria wins, and the king of Hamath was dragged off in chains, and the Syrian king fled, and he sacked Kakar. And then he crossed the Mediterranean Sea all the way to Cyprus, where there were Greek and Phoenician settlers, and demanded and got tribute from them. And then went back to Assyria, built a new capital city called Dur-Shurakin, northeast of Nineveh, rather close to the border with Urartu, okay? I don't know why he built it there, but he did. Close to Urartu. Now, Urartu's uber cool, okay? Urartu, they've got great impenetrable fortresses. They've got cool horses that they would raise in protected valleys until they were old enough to ride. And they had canals and wells that impressed the Assyrians. And something else that's really cool. Do you remember that scene in Lord of the Rings where they light the pyres on the mountaintops? They had that. They did that. Sargon II described it as stars on the mountainside, which is so poetic, even though it was lit because of him. By 714 BC, Sargon II was ready to invade Urartu. Okay? Now, remember, they've got those big fortresses that you can't get through. So, what does he do? He takes his army and goes east, over the Zagros Mountains, and then up and around, which took months, okay? He forded the upper and lower Zab and came to the great looming cypress forest that Gilgamesh, like, in the story of Gilgamesh, he goes to the cypress forest. Same forests. And these are plains people, and they are freaked out by the woods and the mountains, okay? Quote 7.
We came then to high mountains, where trees of all kinds grew entwined. The midst of the mountains chaos, their passes stirring fear. Over all stretched shade like a forest of cedars, where he who treads their path sees no rays of the sun.
They chop their way through the forest with copper tools, and they reach the flatlands on the other side, where the Medes were forced to feed and water the army. Then Sargon II and the army goes north to Urartu and comes to a place to do battle just south of the modern city of Tabriz. Okay, he picked the perfect spot. Okay, it is far away from their fortresses. It's a nice big place to do battle. Everything's good. He's got the army. King Rusus of Urartu has got his army there. They're ready to do battle. Things are great. Except the Assyrian army, is really freaking unhappy. They have been marching through big scary woods and big tall mountains for months. It's been summer, it's been hot, they've been thirsty, and they refuse to do battle. Okay? So they're threatening mutiny. They had marched over 300 miles in the summer heat, all the way up there, just for their king's ego, probably. So the armies are lined up there, they're ready to do battle, and the army refuses to move. So what does Sargon II do? What would you do? If you were Sargon II, what would you do if you were in that position? Like, what is there to do? You have nowhere to go. You have nothing to do because if you don't have control of your army. So what that madman Sargon II decided to do was took his personal bodyguard and himself and attacked the closest Urartian forces. And apparently they were so brutal that the Urartian forces started to give way from just his bodyguards and stuff, him and his bodyguards. On a suicide mission, when the army saw them starting to give way, their spirits lifted and they joined the fight. And the Urartian forces started to retreat, which turned into a rout. And they chased them deep into the mountains. At this point, they stop and turn to head home. Probably because Sargon II knew he couldn't push the army any further. The army was all ready to mutiny. He can't go any further. And besides, winter is coming, and you don't want to get stuck in the mountains over winter. So they turned back to Assyria. King Rusus had to abandon his capital city, and Sargon II and the army head home, and they sack Mushashir on the way, and they arrive home by November. The entire campaign took less than 6 months. So, Sargon II, he's almost at the top of the world, okay? He's received ambassadors from Egypt and Ethiopia and Dilmun. Things are great. He's conquered all around. Except down in Babylon, Remember that guy named Merodach-Baladan? Okay, so he had gained power. As soon as Shelley V had died, he became king of Babylon, okay? He had seen 3 changes in kingship, of Assyrian kingship, in less than a decade, and he was sure that he could outlast Sargon too. He bought Elamite support and made a deal with the king of Elam that they would support him should they come to fight, when they come to fight Assyria. But Sargon too is busy sailing to Cyprus and going up through the Zagros. He's been busy. So Merodach-Baladan runs rampant through Babylon for like a decade. 710 BC, Sargon II turns south, okay? Around the same time, the king of Elam, who made the deal with Merodach-Baladan, dies. And his nephew, who didn't make the deal, Shutruk-Nahunt, becomes king of Elam. Sargon II, because Babylon doesn't really have its own army, he attacks the allies first. So he attacks Elam. Thankfully, Shutruk-Nahunt survived. But Sargon II cut off aid from Elam and marched on Babylon from the southeast. Okay? This is a very, very smart strategy. Okay? Because that's where all of Babylon's allies are, down in the southeast. So him coming from that direction means that it would be very, very dangerous for Merodach-Baladan to escape down to Bit-Yak in his home city. So Merodach-Baladan tries to make a run for Elam, okay? He sends his own personal furniture as a gift to Shutruk-Nahunt, which Shutruk-Nahunt graciously accepted. Then he barred him from coming into Elam. So Merodach-Baladan was forced to flee to Bit-Yakin. I don't know how he got there, but can you imagine the adventure movie, the disguises and the staying at the inns and trying to, oh my god, it's so cool. This is so cool. Merodach-Baladan somehow makes it down to Bit-Yakin, where he jury-rigged a moat and tried and build the walls up and tried to, build it up so that, because he knew Assyria was coming, which Assyria did. Sargon II attacks Bit-Yakin, and Bit-Yakin falls. However, Sargon II lets Merodach-Baladan live, which is interesting because, we've seen his brutality with Samaria. But he lets Merodach-Baladan live for some reason and remain chief of Bit-Yakin. So, then Sargon II, after this, turns north, goes to Babylon, and liberates the city. And he becomes king of Assyria and Babylon. He was the second Sargon, the second founder of a new Assyria, with new borders, a new capital, new subjects, and a new fierce power. 5 years later, Sargon II is dead. And his son, Sennacherib I, takes the throne. I don't know too much about their relationship, but it seems not to have been close, because in all of his records, Sennacherib never acknowledges the existence of his father. He just pretty much erases him from history. And it seems that Sargon II might have spread negative word about his son as he traveled all around the map, saying that, he's a weakling, he's not going to be any sort of good king, blah, blah, blah. And so as soon as Sennacherib takes the throne, everyone around the map decides to do revolt. Sennacherib, when he became king, he didn't take the hand of Marduk. He just announced himself as king of Babylon. He didn't take the hand of Marduk, and so people didn't recognize him as the king. So another guy became king for like a month before Merodach-Baladan came back and took over Babylon. Comes up from Bit-Yakin, there was a guy in Babylon who became king for like a month, but he got dethroned by Merodach-Baladan, and Merodach-Baladan became king of Babylon, and he proclaimed himself its liberator, the restorer of the true Babylon.
The great lord, the god Marduk, looked with favor upon Marduk Apla Idini II, king of Babylon, prince who reveres him. The king of the gods said, "This is indeed the shepherd who will gather the scattered people."
Sennacherib, irritated, sent his general and a detachment of soldiers to restore order. Merodach-Baladan makes hasty deals with everyone in the south and manages to fight off these soldiers. A close victory, okay? This enrages Sennacherib, and he comes down like the wrath of a shore, swept through the allies without pausing, and went to Babylon. Merodach-Baladan retreated, and Babylon opens its gates for Sennacherib. Unfortunately, Sennacherib was freaking angry, so he ransacked the city, took almost 250,000 people captive, and destroyed the fields and groves of anyone who joined in the rebellion. He hunted for Merodach-Baladan, but couldn't find him. At this time, Ekron decides now would be a good time to revolt. So they depose their Assyrian loyal king, put him in chains, and start a rebellion with Tyre and Sidon. And now Judah down here is kind of undecided. They want to be free of Assyria, but no one wins against Assyria. He's unsure about where he stands in this rebellion. In Babylon, Sennacherib puts a puppet king in charge named Bel-Ibni, okay? And he sacks his way west to destroy this rebellion. Quote 9 is something he said about Bel-Ibni, which I think is so insulting, it's hilarious.
He grew up like a puppy in my own house.
Now, Sennacherib sacked his way west, however, slower than normal, okay? Because usually they just sweep through, but he's chugging along. But then, a new player enters the map. Egypt! Yes! Oh my god, Egypt has entered the game, okay? This is so exciting. Now, with Egypt on the horizon, Hezekiah of Judah decides, okay, you know what, I'm in. We're going to fight Assyria. Let's do this. And he decides this. He houses the king of Ekron. They don't want him in the city of Ekron because he's a rallying point in their dungeons. So they send him to Jerusalem. Now, at this time, it's interesting. Merodach-Baladan sends gifts to Hezekiah. In the Bible, it says, chapter 39 of Isaiah says, "At that time, Merodach-Baladan, the son of Baladan, king of Babylon, sent letters and a present to Hezekiah, for he had heard that he had been sick and recovered." So Hezekiah takes these Babylonian ambassadors and shows them all around the palace, including the treasury and the armory, which is dumb. It's not smart. But it was his way of communicating how strong he was and how he would be a powerful ally against Assyria. But still, come on, dude, don't do that. When Isaiah, the court prophet, learned this, he was horrified. And he told Hezekiah, "You're going to lose everything. Your children will be taken away to Babylon. Everything horrible is going to happen, blah, blah, blah." And Hezekiah says that's actually good news, because it's not going to happen in my generation. I hate it when old people sacrifice young people for short-term benefits, like global warming, Sennacherib at this time was busy fighting Lachish, but sent messengers to talk to Hezekiah, okay? He sent his general, chief officer, field commander, and a large army. And they come outside Jerusalem's walls. 3 of Hezekiah's officials go out to meet them. And they converse loudly in Hebrew. Hello, friends, and welcome to the Wall of Jerusalem. Today, we are going to be going over the events of 2 Kings chapter 18, verses 17 to about 31. Behold, the people on the wall. They are listening to what? To what is going on? Behold, Assyrian forces, Assyrian ambassadors are coming. And look, Hezekiah's people. They have come out here to meet. Tell Hezekiah that the king of Assyria has a message for him. You have no one to depend on, no strategy, no strength of your own. You may be depending on Egypt for chariots and horsemen, but Egypt is a splintered reed that you would try to use for a staff. It will pierce your hand if you lean on it. That's such a good line. Please don't speak to us in Hebrew. The people on the wall can understand. Please speak to us in Aramaic. We speak Aramaic. That's the whole freaking point. It's psychological warfare, you dunce. Because the message is for them too. Like you, they will have to eat their own dung and drink their own piss. Rot in hell and surrender. No. Grief. So, this was an incredible warning with an army right there bristling with spears, okay? Now, Hezekiah is said to have rent his clothes in grief and less poetically, sent 11 tons of silver and nearly a ton of gold to Lachish and Sennacherib, and he set the king of Ekron free. Crisis temporarily averted. I guess crisis delayed. Assyria turns its attention to Egypt, okay, because the Egyptian army is coming up. They've taken care of Jerusalem, but now they got to go fight Egypt. We don't know exactly what happened, but it seems that it was a very hard-won victory for Assyria, because at the end of the battle, the Egyptians returned home, but the Assyrians did not follow them. So, looks like it was a hard-won victory. Then Sennacherib turns and besieges Ekron. Ekron falls. Then he turns to Jerusalem. Jerusalem doesn't fall? What? Quote 11. Okay?
As for Hezekiah, I leveled the cities around him with battering rams and siege engines. I gave them to the king of Ekron instead. I took off 200,000 of his people and animals without number. Himself, like a caged bird, I shut up in Jerusalem, his holy city. I threw up earthworks against him, and turned him back into his misery, and the terrifying splendor of my majesty overcame him.
So, quote 11, that isn't exactly what happened. The siege lifts, and Jerusalem's walls are still there. The king is still there. The people are still alive and free, and what happened? Okay? So the Bible says that the angel of the Lord struck down 185,000 of the Assyrian troops. Herodotus says that he heard from Egyptian priests that the camp was overrun by mice and rats. What probably happened was plague broke out in the camp, and due to mounting deaths, he had to retreat. So he returns to Assyria. Sennacherib returns to Assyria, makes Nineveh the new capital, which it would remain for the rest of the empire. And, things are settling, I guess. Now, down in Babylon, the people realize Bel-Ibni, the puppet king, is no Sennacherib. So they move to depose him. Sennacherib goes down to Babylon to figure things out and see what's going on. And there he finds Merodach-Baladan trying to retake Babylon. Merodach-Baladan flees, and Sennacherib pursues. Quote 12.
He fled alone to the sea land, with the bones of his fathers who lived before him, which he gathered from their coffins, and his people he loaded on ships, and crossed over to the other side of the bitter sea.
Now, Sennacherib, he's going to go chase down Merodach-Baladan, but he leaves in charge of Babylon his favorite son, named Ashur-nadin-Shumi. And then Sennacherib goes to do this massive, huge undertaking to try and hunt down Merodach-Baladan. He goes to Phoenicia and makes them build him ships. Then he goes to Tyre and Sidon and Cyprus and hires mercenaries to man those ships. Then he sails these ships down the Euphrates, and because along the Euphrates there are a lot of Elamite outposts, he knew that he didn't want to float his floating army through there. He takes the boats and drags them across land to the Tigris and sets them back in the water and floats on down to the Persian Gulf. Okay, this is a massive undertaking just to hunt down one man. This is expensive. This is so much effort. They sack every city they come across, and they finally get to the city where Merodach-Baladan is holed up. Just to find that just before he arrived, Merodach-Baladan had died of old age. Old age. He died of old age. So he escaped again, this time in death, but that's hilarious. So Sennacherib returns to Nineveh in mixed frustration and victory, and life continues. But there's something else, though. Now everyone knows where the crown prince is. Ashur-nadin-Shumi, he's set in Babylon, and now everybody knows that. The plan took 6 years to put in place. The Elamites sent spies all over Babylon to prepare for the day when they reclaim Babylon. Now, Prince Ashur-nadin-Shumi, one day, he leaves the city walls, and an army rushes across the river, captures him, and returns. They capture the prince. Before Sennacherib can do anything, the Elamites march into Babylon and put their weight behind another claimant to the throne. 3 months later, because it took a while to mobilize armies back then, Sennacherib wins the battle outside Babylon and takes the pretender king captive. But inside the city, another guy by the name of Muzib-Marduk stripped the temple of gold and used it to hire more Elamites. This led to full-out war between Assyria, Babylon, and Elam for 4 years, okay? Sennacherib invaded Elam twice, and Elam led a retaliatory attack along the banks of the Tigris. Quote 13.
With the dust of their feet covering the wide heavens like a mighty storm, they drew up in battle array before me. On the banks of the Tigris they blocked my passage and offered battle. I put on my coat of mail, my helmet, emblem of victory, I placed upon my head. My great battle chariot, which brings low the foe, I hurriedly mounted in the anger of my heart. The mighty bow which Ashur had given me, I seized in my hands. The javelin, piercing to the life, I grasped. I stopped their advance, succeeding in surrounding them. I decimated the enemy host with arrow and spear. All of their bodies I bored through. I cut their throats, cut off their precious lives as one cuts a string. Like the many waters of a storm, I made the contents of their gullets and entrails run down upon the wide earth. My prancing steeds, harnessed for my riding, plunged into the streams of their blood as into a river. The wheels of my war chariot, which brings low the wicked and the evil, were bespattered with filth and blood. With the bodies of their warriors I filled the plain like grass. Their testicles I cut off, and tore out their privates like the seeds of cucumbers of June.
Babylon simply notes that Assyria lost. Now, you can only throw so many bodies at the Babylon problem, so eventually Sennacherib returns to Nineveh and waits for a shift in the power dynamics to invade again. That shift came the next year when the king of Elam likely had a stroke. The records say that he couldn't give commands, he couldn't speak, and he was like paralyzed on one side or something. And so the problem with monarchy is that if the one person in charge is out of commission, then everyone's out of commission. So with Elam out, Assyria attacks Babylon. Babylon loses, obviously, and he ordered Babylon razed. Okay, quote 14.
I destroyed. I devastated. I burned with fire. The wall and the outer wall, temples and gods, temple towers of brick and earth, as many as there were, I raised and dumped them into the Aktu Canal. Through the midst of the city I dug canals. I flooded its site with water, that in days to come the site of that city and its temples and gods might not be remembered. I completely blotted it out with floods of water and made it like a meadow.
He turned Babylon into a lake. Okay? That's. He stole the statue of Marduk, and all this happened, but the prince, Ashur-nadin-Shumi, is never mentioned again. He was likely tortured to death just out of sheer hatred for Assyria. Wild. There was never any ransom notice. He was just, they never asked for a ransom. So hunting down Merodach-Baladan had doomed his eldest and favorite son to death. 7 years later, in the holy temple of Nabu, Sennacherib was killed by two of his younger sons. Sennacherib died, king of Assyria and the ruins of Babylon. He raised the map. He did so much, but the only thing he's remembered for is failing to take Jerusalem. That's all anyone remembers Sennacherib for, was that one battle he lost. He didn't even lose the battle, he just didn't fight the battle. Thank you for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and thank you for letting me tell you about my Roman Empire, Assyria. Thank you. Have a nice day. Sources are The History of the Ancient World by Susan Wise Bauer, Google, and the Holy Freaking Word of God. So don't at me, bro. But guys, Urartu remains independent.